The wind howled outside the Red Keep as the sun dipped low, casting blood-red shadows over the Iron Throne. Inside the royal bedchamber, King Robert Baratheon lay pale and bloated, breath shallow, lips parched with wine and regret. The once mighty warrior, the man who shattered Rhaegar Targaryen and seized the realm, was now little more than a ruined shell of flesh and guilt. Ned Stark sat by his side, stoic as ever, refusing to show emotion even as death crept near. The Maester had left to fetch ink and parchment for the king's last will. Robert's hand shook as he reached for Ent's arm. "Promise me, End," he whispered, barely audible, voice thick with years of ale and self-loathing. "They're my blood. They didn't ask to be born bastards. I made them. I loved some of them more than I ever loved Cersei." End flinched. He didn't want to hear this. Not now, not ever. But Robert wouldn't be silenced. "Write it down," Robert rasped. "All of them, Mya, Gendry, Edric, the rest. I want them legitimized. Name them Baratheons. I want the world to know they're mine. Let the nobles choke on it." End hesitated, jaw tight. "Robert, this will throw the realm into chaos. Your true-born children." "My true-born children," Robert scoffed bitterly, coughing up a wad of blood. "You mean the blonde-haired Lannister cubs? Don't insult me." The silence in the room grew heavy. End said nothing, but his eyes confirmed the unspoken truth. Maester Pycelle returned with the parchment, quill, and wax seal. Robert dictated every name he could remember, even half-guessing some. He gave them all the Baratheon name and rights of inheritance. Gendry, the blacksmith's apprentice. Mya, the mule girl in the Vale. Edric Storm, growing up in the Stormlands. He didn't stop until his hand trembled so badly he couldn't lift the goblet of wine. End didn't argue. He only watched, torn between loyalty and dread. This was no simple mercy. This was a spark near dry tinder. That night, Robert Baratheon died in his bed, drunk, bleeding from boar wounds, and finally at peace with his sins. But the realm would not know peace. The raven flew before his body turned cold. It carried a sealed letter with the hand's sigil and the king's dying wishes. It went to Storm's End first, where Stannis Baratheon sat brooding over ledgers and rumors. When Stannis read the letter, his face didn't change, but his knuckles went white. "Legitimized bastards," he murmured. He named them in the line of succession. He read the names again. Gendry, Edric, Mya, more. This changes everything. Farther south, in King's Landing, Cersei Lannister tore open another letter. When she saw what it contained, her scream echoed through the halls. "My children, my heirs, have been cast aside for whore's spawn." She summoned the gold cloaks. "Find these bastards, kill them all, every last one." But it was too late. The storm had already broken. Ravens flew across Westeros, carrying the decree of a dying king, and though Robert's blood no longer pulsed in his veins, it now pulsed in the hands of those who had never known power until now. The city buzzed with whispers as word spread. In taverns, brothels, and marketplaces, small folk spoke the name Gendry like it was sacred, cursed, or both. A blacksmith's apprentice just days ago, Gendry had gone from swinging hammers to dodging daggers. He didn't understand why the gold cloaks stormed the shop at dawn. Tobhomat, the armorer, had barely time to lie. "The boy's dead," he told them. "Fever took him, burned the body myself." But they didn't believe it. They tossed the shop, beat Mott bloody, and left only after scaring off half the apprentices. Gendry had already fled, guided by a coin and a warning from a hooded stranger, one of Varys' little birds, though Gendry wouldn't know that. All he knew was fear. "Ride to the north," the stranger had said, slipping him a sack of bread and a cheap dagger. "There are those who might protect you, but do not speak your name, not unless you're ready to bleed for it." Meanwhile, in the Vale, Mya Stone stood atop a cliff near the Eyrie, watching the falcons wheel across the sky. When the raven came with the king's seal, her hands trembled reading it. "Robert," she whispered. Her mother had spoken little of him, just that he was strong, loud, and gone. A man who had laughed once with her and never again. But this was different. She was a Baratheon now. The knights in the Vale, sworn to House Arryn, received her differently the next day. Some bowed their heads, others scoffed, one openly cursed. "That mule girl, a lady." Lord Yon Royce held the paper in his thick hands and frowned deeply. "This changes the succession. Legitimized bastards, the lords of Westeros, will not accept this lightly. Nor would Queen Cersei. In the Red Keep, she ordered Varys to account for every known bastard of Robert's still breathing. You had your spies sniffing every corner of the realm. You knew, don't play the fool. Varys bowed, soft-spoken. "My queen, I warned the Council of the risks years ago, but the king was fond of his indulgences." She turned sharply. He was a drunk. Now I have a realm full of little drunken heirs walking around, each one a threat to my children. Tommen and Miachella, sweet, golden-haired, and completely unaware that a war for their inheritance had begun. Cersei summoned Sir Meryn Trant. Find them, all of them. If you can't find them, burn the towns they're rumored to live in. I want no trace, no face, no blood, nothing left of Robert's filth. Across the sea, even Daenerys Targaryen heard the whispers. Her advisors brought the raven late into the night. She didn't laugh. So now the usurper's seed grows like weeds, she said coldly. He hated his bastards when he lived. Now he would crown them. Ser Jorah shrugged. Perhaps it's a final insult to the Lannisters. Perhaps a dying king's remorse. Daenerys turned to her dragons, or perhaps the Seven Kingdoms have finally begun to eat themselves alive. In Dragonstone, Stannis stared into the flames as Melisandre whispered at his side. They are false heirs, she said, shadowborn, unclean. Yet they carry his blood, Stannis said, more than Joffrey ever did. And still only one can be king, she answered. Only one is the Lord's chosen. He clenched his jaw, then let them come. Let the bastards gather their banners and claim their rights. I will answer them steel for steel. The war had not started yet, but already blades were being sharpened. Names were being whispered, blood was being marked for spilling, and the ghosts of Robert Baratheon's sins had just begun to rise. The road north was cruel. Gendry hadn't known how far the world stretched until he had to walk it. He kept his head down, covered his face with a hood, and never stayed long in any village. Every time a rider passed, his stomach twisted. He didn't know what being a Baratheon meant, only that men were dying for it now. The memories of the forge haunted him, the feel of hot iron, the hammer's weight, the simple clarity of the work. Now everything was uncertain. The dagger at his waist wasn't for crafting, it was for surviving. At a tavern near Harrenhal, a grizzled man eyed him too long. Gendry gripped his drink tighter. Before trouble could boil, a girl's voice broke the tension. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, sliding into the seat beside him. She had dust on her cloak, a sword at her hip, and a smirk far too confident for her age. "I'm no one," Gendry muttered. "Funny," she said. So am I. That night, he met Arya Stark again, but not as a smith's apprentice or a lord's daughter. They were just two runaways, both hunted for names they didn't ask for. They shared bread and silence until sunrise. Neither said what they truly were. Back in the Vale, Mya Stone rode hard from the mountains, escorted by 3 knights sent by Yohn Royce. Word had reached her that Cersei had issued a bounty, 50 gold dragons for her head. "I should have stayed with the mules," she muttered grimly. One night, Sir Edric Wayne rode closer. "You're a Baratheon now, you'll be safer in the Riverlands. Riverrun still honors old debts to your father." Mya didn't respond. She wasn't used to being escorted like a lady. She wasn't used to mattering. And now every shadow along the trail looked like a hired killer. At Storm's End, Edric Storm stood before the Great Hall with the king's decree in hand. The castle's lords were uneasy. Some questioned the seal. Others looked to Sir Davos Seaworth, now a trusted man of letters and salt. Edric looked like a boy still, but his voice had hardened. "If Robert Baratheon acknowledged me, then I will not hide like a dog. My father was a king." Davos nodded slowly, and kings draw knives to their throats like meat to flies. Lord Selwyn Tarth agreed to shelter him, but warned, "The queen's blades are everywhere. If you stay, we must be ready for war." And war was indeed coming. At King's Landing, Cersei had moved fast. One of Maya's escorts was found gutted. A house near Blackwater burned with a girl inside, mistaken for Gendry's sister. The people were frightened, but more frightened of silence. The queen's rage had no limits. Tyrion Lannister, reading through letters by candlelight, sighed deeply. "She's turned Robert's death into a butcher's market," he muttered. Varys appeared behind him like mist. "And yet the more blood she spills, the more the realm remembers these bastards." Tyrion lit a fresh candle. "You almost sound fond of them." Varys' smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'm fond of balance, and right now the scales are cracking." Word came from Dorne, even they had begun murmuring. If Robert's blood ran strong in his bastards, maybe one of them could unite the realm against the Lannisters. A new king. A new dynasty. Tommen, sweet and unaware, sat on the throne as a puppet. Margaery Tyrell watched with quiet calculation. Her family whispered of arranging a marriage. A Baratheon bastard with name and cause might be a useful match. Even the Night's Watch heard whispers carried on ravens. Jon Snow read the letter in the cold darkness of Castle Black. "Gendry legitimized?" he muttered aloud. Samwell Tarly looked up from his books. "Do you know him?" Jon stared into the fire. I think I might have once. The kingdom no longer had a clear heir. Legitimized or not, Robert's bastards had no claim by tradition, but they had his name now, and that name still meant something to the people. Banners were starting to rise in small corners. A blacksmith's hammer, a yellow stag, a lightning bolt. They had no lords, no great castles, no dragons, but they had blood, and sometimes that's all it takes to start a war. The Riverlands were no safer than anywhere else. War had gutted the region before, and now it stirred again, quietly like a snake warming beneath stone. MYA Stone arrived at Riverrun under armed escort, cloaked in borrowed silk and bearing a name she still didn't feel she deserved. The Blackfish, Sir Brynden Tully, received her with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "You've got your father's eyes," he muttered, studying her face. "But you wear the look of a fighter, not a lady." "I was never raised in a castle," she said, meeting his gaze. "And I've no need for soft shoes or pretty gowns." He liked that. Most of the older lords did, but liking didn't mean trusting, and trust had become rarer than gold in Westeros. Lord Edmure, recently returned to power, wasn't so sure what to do with a legitimized royal bastard suddenly on his doorstep. "If we shelter her, we risk the Queen's wrath," he warned in the War Council. "We still haven't recovered from the last one." Brynden scowled. "So we turn away a girl because she has the wrong name in the right blood." Outside the castle walls, riders were already watching, spies of the crown. Cersei had loosed them like rabid dogs across the kingdoms. In the Stormlands, Edric Storm refused to hide. Under Sir Davos' guidance, he began writing letters to the Vale, the North Dorne. Letters of peace, of unity, of claiming what his father had given, but peace is rarely answered with peace. House Florent, once loyal to Stannis, began plotting in secret. "A bastard in power is a threat to all noble blood," one said to another. "If we let one rise, others will follow." And in the shadows, gold was changing hands. Assassins rode under false banners. At the wall, Jon Snow sat in cold silence after reading a second raven. This one came from Davos Seaworth himself, sealed in wax, blunt and to the point. "You were once his friend. He needs allies. If you still serve the realm, help us. The Queen wants their blood. We want peace. Choose." Jon had already chosen to take no wife, bear no child, seek no crown, and yet the idea of Robert's sons hunted like wolves stirred something buried deep in his chest. Gendry had reached the north by then, escorted by no one, trusting no soul. But when he reached the gates of Winterfell, he nearly turned back. It felt too large, too proud, too far from the forge where he'd once belonged. Then the gates opened. Arya stood waiting. She hadn't sent word ahead, she simply knew he'd come. "You look worse than the last time," she said dryly. He grinned, half-starved and scarred. "You look like a Stark again." She didn't answer, just gestured him inside. Winterfell didn't question his presence, not out loud, not yet, but whispers traveled fast. "The bastard king's son," they said. "Come to claim what?" Arya led him to Jon. The reunion was strange, not exactly warm, but honest. Jon studied him. "Do you want a throne?" Gendry shook his head. "I just want to live." "That may not be an option," Jon said flatly. Farther south, Cersei's fury had reached new heights. News of Edric writing letters of MYA protected by Tullys and now Gendry, confirmed alive in the north, drove her near madness. "3 are enough to start a rebellion," she spat to Qyburn. "Find a 4th, let them gather, I'll crush them in one blow." But it wasn't just the Lannisters who were uneasy. Stannis Baratheon had drawn a line in the sand. He would not kneel to bastards, blood or not. He declared himself the true king once more, claiming that even Robert's decree could not rewrite the gods' laws. "The throne is not a toy for his regrets," he told his bannermen. "They are bastards, and they will remain so in my eyes." Melisandre stood beside him, fire dancing in her gaze. "Let them rise, let the false ones come. The flames will show the chosen." In secret corners of Westeros, commoners began to chant a name that hadn't been spoken in years. Not Robert, not Stannis, not even Joffrey. "Stormborns," they said. "The storm has returned." Winterfell was colder than Gendry remembered, not just the wind or snow, but the quiet, the way people watched him with more curiosity than welcome. He'd been raised among soot and steel, where your worth was measured in work. Here, names mattered more than deeds, and his name had become dangerous. Arya had given him a place in the barracks, but few dared speak to him. One lad tried to pick a fight, mocking him as the king's mule. Gendry didn't swing back. He didn't need to. Arya shut the boy up with one look. Still, Gendry felt restless. He spent hours at the forge, even though he wasn't required to work. The blacksmith there, a bald northerner named Harl, watched him with a mix of admiration and fear. "You strike like a man with something to prove," Harl said, watching Gendry hammer out a blade. Gendry looked up. "I'm not proving anything. I'm trying to remember who I was before I became something I didn't ask for." Meanwhile, Jon Snow and Arya met in the crypts beneath Winterfell. Among the cold stone faces of dead Starks, they spoke in whispers. "He's not ready," Jon said. "He doesn't even understand what he means to the realm." Arya knelt by End's statue, brushing frost from the stone. "He doesn't want a crown, he wants peace." Jon shook his head. "Peace is the one thing a Baratheon name won't buy now." Elsewhere, the north was stirring. Ravens from the Vale, from Riverrun, and even from Dorne came asking one question: what side will the north take if war breaks again? Sansa Stark, now Lady of Winterfell in all but title, had been watching everything. She called Jon and Arya into council. "I don't care what Robert wrote on his deathbed," she said plainly. "The South is turning this into another war for the throne, and I won't let the North burn for it again." Arya frowned. "So we throw Gendry out, let him be hunted?" "No," Sansa replied. "We protect him, but we do not take up arms in his name. The North would shelter, but not fight, not yet. In the Riverlands, things were less cautious. MYA Stone had begun to draw support from scattered knights, men who had once ridden with Robert and still held his memory like a fire in their hearts. She rides like her father, Sir Brynden said after watching her train. And she has his stubbornness, too. A few hedge knights pledged loyalty outright, swearing to the Baratheon blood in her. But with every new supporter, a new assassin came. One tried to poison her horse. Another posed as a stable boy, dagger in hand, until Sir Edric Wayne slit his throat. MYA was changing. Hardened, focused. "If they're going to hunt me like a wolf," she told Edric, "then I may as well grow teeth." She began writing letters too, not for peace like Edric's storm, but for justice, for vengeance, and the small folk listened. They remembered her mother. They remembered the man who'd loved whores and battle more than courtrooms. They remembered the real Robert Baratheon. Even the Brotherhood without banners began to stir again, hearing rumors of a Baratheon girl raising banners of her own. And in the shadows of King's Landing, Varys moved like a whisper through the court. He visited Qyburn one evening, uninvited, and smiled thinly. "You're bleeding the realm, Qyburn." Assassins in every corner, fire in every town. How long until the people remember what happened to the last mad ruler? Qyburn, unbothered, stirred a small vial of green liquid. "The queen is doing what's necessary. If these bastards are allowed to live, what's next? Targaryen whores crawling out of lies, Stark pups barking from the snow." Varys nodded slowly. Funny how people always use order to excuse slaughter. Then he vanished again. The realm was splitting, not with swords, yet but with words, with rumors, with fear. Edric Storm gathered scholars to study old succession laws. MYA gathered knights. Gendry forged steel in silence, and all the while ravens flew carrying Robert's ghost on their wings. In Dorne, Prince Quentyn Martell received word from MYA and Edric both. He read the letters and smiled. "Seems the lions are finally surrounded." The storm broke at dawn in the Riverlands. It began with fire, black smoke rising from the edges of Riverrun as a detachment of Queen Cersei's mercenaries, hired through House Lannister's deep coffers, struck under cover of fog. They didn't ride under banners. They didn't announce themselves. They simply burned. MYA Stone woke to screaming, the stench of blood and ash already in the air. She didn't hesitate. She grabbed her sword, kicked in the door of her guard captain, and shouted, "We ride. Now!" Sir Edric Wayne rode at her side, his face hard as stone. The enemy had come for her again, and this time they'd come in numbers, but they hadn't expected her to be ready. At the gates, MYA led a countercharge, half her guards mounted, the rest on foot. Archers from the walls rained down arrows as she plunged into the smoke, blade flashing. She wasn't a noble, she wasn't a queen. But in that moment, MYA Stone was Robert's daughter. When the dust cleared, over 40 men lay dead in the mud, most of them Lannister-paid killers. 2 of Maya's men had fallen. One had his throat slit defending her horse. Another died with a grin on his face, blood still warm on his blade. Brynden Tully met her on the field, jaw clenched. "This is an act of war." MYA, hair soaked with sweat and ash, replied coldly, "No, this is Cersei Lannister declaring war on Robert's children." News traveled fast. The attack shocked even those in King's Landing. When the small council met that evening, the queen's chair sat empty. Cersei had locked herself in her chambers, speaking to no one. Tyrion poured himself a glass of wine and read aloud from the report. Riverlands attacked. 1 bastard nearly killed. 50 gold cloaks dead. Mercenaries routed. No formal declaration. He looked around the table. Still want to pretend this isn't a civil war? Lord Baelish leaned forward, smiling that snake's smile. She wants them dead. She doesn't care what it costs. Varys, hands folded neatly, said, and now half the Riverlands think Mya Stone is their queen. Meanwhile, Edric Storm sent his own message to Dorne, a call to honor, to rebellion, to justice. He wrote of Robert's final words, of the blood they all shared. He called upon the Martells not to fight for the Baratheon name, but to fight against Lannister tyranny. Prince Quentyn Martell, ever calm, summoned his council. "This is no longer about a throne," he said. "This is about fire. It spreads. And soon it will reach us, whether we stand or hide." The Martells didn't love Robert Baratheon. They remembered Elia, but they hated Lannisters even more, and so they replied. With soldiers, 3,000 Dornish spears began marching toward the Stormlands. In the north, word of Maya's victory and Cersei's attack hit Winterfell like a thunderclap. Arya was the first to react. "She's at war. That means Gendry's next." Jon Snow didn't hesitate. "We protect him, publicly." Sansa objected. "We swore neutrality. If we openly support him, we become targets." Jon looked her dead in the eyes. "If we don't, we become cowards." And so the North declared itself, quietly but undeniably. A raven left Winterfell bearing the Stark seal and Jon Snow's words, "We will not kneel to a queen who slaughters children. Gendry Baratheon has our protection. Harm him, and it's war." When the raven reached King's Landing, the queen's fury exploded. She slapped Tommen in front of the court. She shattered a goblet against the throne room's marble floor. And when Qyburn told her the wildfire stores were replenished, she only smiled. "They want to see the fury of a lioness," she whispered. "Let them." In secret, her orders were clear: assassinate Gendry at Winterfell, burn the Riverlands again, poison Edric Storm, and if Dorne rose, answer with fire. But the realm was no longer afraid of her. In taverns, on ships, in the camps of mercenaries and hedge knights, a chant began to rise. "The bastards shall inherit. Not out of love, not out of loyalty, but out of fury, out of hate for the Lannisters. Out of sheer need for change." 3 Baratheon bloods, scattered, hunted, scarred, but rising. Gendry was in the forge when the assassin came. It was a cold, clear night in Winterfell, and the air outside was still. Arya had just left to patrol the walls, and the guards were thinner than usual, enough for someone smart, someone quiet to slip in. He heard the creak of leather before he saw anything. Years of hammering had sharpened his instincts. He turned just in time to catch a glimpse of a dark figure lunging toward him, blade drawn. The assassin aimed for his throat, fast and trained, but Gendry was faster. The hammer was already in his hand. Not a sword, not a noble's blade. A smith's hammer, heavy, chipped, and soaked in sweat. He brought it up with raw instinct, blocking the dagger, then slammed it across the attacker's ribs with a crunch of bone and a scream. The man staggered but didn't fall. He went for his boot, another knife. Gendry roared, not with technique, not with grace, with power. He drove the hammer down onto the man's skull. Once, twice. The third time it cracked like split wood. Blood pooled across the stone floor. Arya found him minutes later, still breathing hard, covered in blood. The hammer in his hand trembled slightly. "You all right?" she asked. Gendry nodded, voice hoarse. He didn't say anything, no name, just steel. Arya crouched and inspected the corpse, her face darkened. "Lannister gold in his purse," she muttered. "They're done hiding it." That night, Jon called a council. Sansa sat beside him, her face pale but set with resolve. Arya stood guard near the door. Gendry sat beside the fire, the hammer still in reach. "They won't stop," Jon said. "They'll keep coming, for him, for all of them." Maester Walken cleared his throat. "If Gendry is publicly declared a guest of Winterfell under your protection, any further attempt on his life could be seen as a declaration of war." Sansa nodded. "Then we let the realm know. We're not hiding anymore." By the next morning, ravens flew from Winterfell again. Gendry Baratheon, son of Robert, is under the protection of House Stark. Any assault on his life is an assault on the north. The message echoed from castle to castle, and far to the south it triggered what Cersei had feared most: open rebellion. In the Riverlands, Mya Stone raised her banner for the first time. It was simple: a black field, a yellow stag, and no words. She didn't need a motto. Her name was her message. Her blood was her claim. Hedge knights, disillusioned lords, and exiled soldiers began to rally to her. Brynden Tully, though wary of another war, pledged her the Tully Riders. "She's got more fire in her than most born in velvet," he told his men. In the Stormlands, Edric Storm took a different route. He refused to take up arms. Instead, he began organizing the commoners, teaching them to read, sharing Robert's final decree, and declaring a peaceful challenge to the throne. But peace rarely survives contact with power. A Lannister force arrived under the banner of House Lefford and demanded Edric's surrender. When he refused, they torched 3 villages in retribution. Edric finally snapped. He took up a sword. The very next day, Prince Quentyn Martell's Dornish spears met him at the Crossroads Inn and declared allegiance. "Fire was promised," Quentyn said, handing Edric a sword, "but we'll give them a storm instead." King's Landing began to suffocate under the Queen's paranoia. The gold cloaks no longer patrolled, they hunted. Spies were everywhere. Nobles disappeared in the night. Even the Red Keep felt like a prison. Tyrion Lannister, drinking more than ever, met with Varys on the Tower of the Hand. "This is what madness looks like," Tyrion muttered, watching smoke rise from the city's lower quarter. "And I've lived through it before." Varys' voice was grim. "This time the fire may not stop at the gates." Cersei had begun preparing the wildfire again. "Let them come," she whispered in the throne room. "Let all the bastards crawl to the capital. I will burn them in one night." But outside the walls, something unexpected happened. The people began whispering, not of Joffrey, not of Tommen, but of the bastards. They spoke of Maya's fight at Riverrun, of Edric's defiance in the Stormlands, of Gendry's hammer splitting a killer's skull in Winterfell. They weren't kings, they weren't nobles, but they were real, and in a kingdom ruled by lies, the truth had become rebellion. The sky over King's Landing was heavy with smoke. Ships from Dorne, the Reach, and even the Riverlands had anchored off Blackwater Bay. On land, armies gathered just out of sight. Ragtag, scattered, not united under one great house, but under one shared idea, that Robert Baratheon's bloodline had not died, and that Cersei Lannister had no more right to the Iron Throne than Wildfire had to mercy. Inside the Red Keep, the Queen stood draped in crimson and gold, crown burning on her brow like a curse. The throne room echoed with silence. Even the Lannister bannermen were restless. The gold cloaks, once her loyal enforcers, had begun deserting. She paced before the Iron Throne, surrounded by silence and suspicion. "They are bastards, they are nothing," she whispered. Realm cannot be ruled by whore's spawn. But her voice lacked fire now. Rage was giving way to desperation. That evening her final order was sent. The wildfire was to be readied. If the gates fell, so too would the city. In the north, Gendry stood at the gates of Winterfell, a raven in hand. Jon Snow had given it to him with a heavy expression. "They're going to burn the city," Jon said. "They'll kill everyone to keep the throne, and people will remember we stood back." Gendry opened the letter. It was from Edric Storm. "Come, stand with me. If we fall as brothers." He didn't answer right away. He walked to the forge, his place of peace, of memory. The hammer was there, gleaming in the firelight. Arya watched him from the shadows. "You're going, aren't you?" He nodded. "Not for the throne, not for Robert, for them, for the ones who weren't born in castles and never asked to be kings." She didn't say goodbye, just handed him a blade and walked away. He left Winterfell that night, riding south with a company of northern warriors. At the same time, Mya Stone rode through the Riverlands with Tully riders at her side. She stopped being just a name. She'd become a symbol. She wore no crown, took no titles. She fought beside her men, and when she crossed into the Crownlands, the peasants lined the roads, not with fear but hope. They didn't chant her name. They just opened their doors. In the Stormlands, Edric Storm met Prince Quentyn Martell under the shattered banner of a ruined sept. He was no longer the quiet bastard boy. He'd become something else, not a conqueror but a cause. He gave no grand speech, no proclamations. He simply said, "Let's take the city and give it back to the people." When the 3 Baratheons met outside King's Landing, it wasn't planned, but fate has a strange sense of timing. Gendry bloodied and armored in black, Mya on a dust-covered steed with mud on her boots and fire in her eyes. Edric standing with a map, calm and calculating. They stood together in silence, 3 faces the world had forgotten, until now. Then the gates of King's Landing opened. But not because they had been broken, because they were let in. The people inside had turned. Gold cloaks surrendered their swords. Merchants flung open their doors. Even some Lannister loyalists dropped their banners when they saw the wildfire being hauled toward the septs. They didn't come to burn the city, they came to save it. The Baratheon bastards marched through the streets like thunder. No crowns, no trumpets, just steel, ash, and purpose. In the Red Keep, Cersei Lannister stood before the Iron Throne alone. When Gendry entered, she didn't scream, she didn't fight. She only stared at him at the hammer in his hand and laughed. "He'd have hated you," she whispered. "All of you." "I know," Gendry said. MYA spoke next. "You burned a kingdom for what?" Cersei closed her eyes. "Because I could." She drank poison from her own goblet before they could take her, and just like that, the lioness died. No one sat the Iron Throne that day. They left it cold, empty. The three Baratheons walked away from it together, down the halls of the keep and out into the streets where the people cheered, not for kings, not for queens, but for something far rarer, justice. In the weeks that followed, a council was formed. The Iron Throne was melted down, its blades forged into plows and hammers. The realm would be ruled not by one, but many, representatives from the north, south, east, and west. Gendry returned to the Forge, MYA to the Vale, Edric to the Stormlands. None of them wore crowns, but their names would echo through the realm for generations, not because they ruled, but because they refused to. And thus ended the Age of Bastards, not in shame, not in fire, but in the quiet thunder of a broken realm learning how to heal.